They contacted me at 2:15 a.m. while I was resolving the server outage in Chicago, bleeding $95,000 every hour. Your contract ends at 7 a.m. today. I replied, fine, I'll notify the tech director that you're taking over the fix since my access will be revoked. Immediately, they understood what they'd just done. I'm Calista Rodriguez, and until that moment, I was the senior infrastructure engineer at Brightwave Solutions, a financial technology company managing payment systems for 17 major banks across the Midwest. My job: keep the money flowing. Always. When systems go down, every minute costs more than most people make in a month. That Tuesday night started like any other on-call rotation. I'd just gotten my daughter Mia to bed after helping her with her science project about volcanoes. Julian, my husband, was finishing up some work emails in his home office. I was watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures when my phone exploded with alerts at 2:03 a.m. The Chicago Data Center, our primary hub processing real-time transactions for retail banking clients, had just gone dark. Not slow, not degraded, completely offline. I bolted upright, laptop already opening. Julian appeared in the doorway, concern written across his face. Another one. Big one, I muttered, fingers already flying across the keyboard. My VPN connected, and I dove into the system logs. The cascade failure was spreading like wildfire through our transaction processors. Every second, thousands of declined credit cards, frozen ATM withdrawals, failed direct deposits. The kind of disaster that makes headlines and ends careers. Within 3 minutes, I'd identified the root cause. A corrupted routing table had created a loop, choking our network bandwidth. The automated failover hadn't triggered because someone had disabled it during last week's maintenance and never re-enabled it. I didn't have time to figure out who. I had to stop the bleeding first. I pulled up the emergency protocols and started manually rerouting traffic to our backup systems in Denver. It was delicate work, like performing surgery while running a marathon. One wrong command, and I'd knock the backup offline too, doubling our nightmare. My phone rang. Andrew Lawson, our tech director. Calista, please tell me you're seeing this. I'm already on it, I said, not looking away from my screen. 15 minutes to stabilization if nothing else breaks. What do you need? Coffee and silence, in that order. I hung up. Andrew knew me well enough not to take offense. We'd worked together for 4 years, ever since Brightwave acquired the startup where I'd built my reputation as the engineer who could fix anything. Julian appeared with coffee, kissed the top of my head, and disappeared. This was our routine. He understood that when I was in crisis mode, I became a machine focused on one thing: solving the problem. By 2:47 a.m., I had traffic flowing through Denver. Transaction processing resumed. The error rate started dropping. My shoulders, which had been locked up around my ears, finally relaxed a fraction. Then my phone buzzed with a message. Not from Andrew, from Derek Miller, the vice president of operations. I'd dealt with Derek exactly 4 times in my tenure at Brightwave. Each interaction left me feeling like I needed a shower. He was the type of executive who took credit for successes he didn't contribute to and deflected blame for failures he absolutely caused. 6 feet of polished suits, rehearsed smiles, and a complete inability to understand the technical systems his department supposedly managed. The message read, "Need to discuss your contract situation. Call me." At 2:48 in the morning, while I'm literally saving the company millions, the audacity was almost impressive. I ignored it and continued monitoring the systems. Chicago was still offline, but with Denver handling the load, we'd bought time to diagnose the deeper issues. I started tracing back through the maintenance logs to find out who disabled the failover protocols. The answer made my blood run cold. Derek Miller had authorized it. More specifically, he'd ordered it disabled to save on redundancy testing costs. The email was dated 6 days ago, sent to Timothy Walsh, a junior network administrator who probably didn't feel empowered to question a VP. I screenshotted everything and sent it to my personal email. Something about this felt wrong. My phone rang. Derek. What? I answered, not bothering with pleasantries. Calista, we need to talk about your contract. I'm in the middle of fixing the outage that's currently costing us $100,000 an hour. Can this wait? No, actually it can't. Your contract ends at 7 a.m. today. We're not renewing. The world tilted slightly. I looked at the clock, 2:52 a.m. You're firing me in 4 hours while I'm fixing a critical outage. Your contract expires, he corrected, as if the distinction mattered. Human Resources was supposed to notify you last week, but there was an administrative oversight. I'm informing you now as a courtesy. A courtesy? I was keeping the company's entire infrastructure from collapsing, and he was calling this a courtesy. Fine, I said, my voice ice cold. I'll notify Andrew that you'll be taking over the remediation since my access will be revoked at 7. Silence, long, beautiful silence. What's the status of the outage? Derek finally asked, his tone shifting. Actively being resolved by me, the contractor whose employment ends in 4 hours. I assume you'll want to brief whoever's taking over my work. Callista, let's not be hasty. The contract situation is a formality. We can discuss. I need the following in writing within 30 minutes. Confirmation of my employment status, clarification of my access rights, and authorization to continue working this incident. Otherwise, I'm logging off at 7 a.m. sharp, and you can explain to the board why transactions are still failing. You can't. I absolutely can, Derek. I'm a contractor, remember? You just reminded me, which means I have no obligation to work beyond my contract terms. 30 minutes. Email me. I hung up. Julian was standing in the doorway again, eyes wide. Did you just? I did. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. He picked the worst possible moment to play power games. The next 27 minutes were the longest of my life. I continued monitoring the systems, documenting every step of my remediation work in meticulous detail. If they were going to force me out, they'd at least have a clear record of what I'd done to save them. At 3:19 a.m., an email arrived from Derek, with Andrew and someone from HR CC'd. It confirmed my contract extension through the week, with compensation for emergency response work and a meeting scheduled for Thursday to discuss future arrangements. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. Welcome to the Payback Office channel, where workplace justice isn't just a fantasy. If you're enjoying this story of standing up to corporate nonsense, hit that subscribe button. Let's start reaching 9,000 subscribers together. By 5:30 a.m., I had the Chicago data center back online, all failover protocols re-enabled, and a comprehensive incident report documenting exactly how Derek's cost-cutting measure had caused a multi-million-dollar crisis. I sent it to Andrew with Derek CC'd. Andrew called immediately. You're brilliant, get some sleep, we'll talk this afternoon. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt exhausted and anxious. Derek wasn't the type to forgive embarrassment, and I just embarrassed him in front of the tech director. Julian wrapped me in a hug when I finally closed my laptop. You did good. I probably just made an enemy. You already had an enemy, you just stopped pretending otherwise. He was right, of course, but knowing that didn't make what came next any easier. I woke up at noon to 17 missed calls and 43 emails. My heart hammered as I scrolled through them, expecting disaster. Instead, I found something worse. Silence from Derek, professional gratitude from Andrew, and a meeting invitation for 4 p.m. that day titled Infrastructure Review. The knot in my stomach tightened. Julian had taken the day off to work from home, bless him. He'd picked up Mia from school and they were making cookies in the kitchen, her laughter drifting upstairs. For a moment, I let myself pretend everything was normal. Then I opened my laptop and started preparing for war. The thing about working in IT infrastructure for 4 years is you develop a comprehensive understanding of where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. You know which systems are held together with digital duct tape and prayer. You know which supposedly redundant backups haven't been tested in 18 months. You know exactly how fragile everything really is. And if you're smart, you've been documenting it all. I'd started keeping detailed records about 8 months ago when Derek first arrived at Brightwave. He'd immediately started making technical decisions based purely on budget numbers, overruling the engineers who actually understood the systems. Andrew had pushed back where he could, but Derek had the CEO's ear and a talent for making dangerous choices sound fiscally responsible. The disabled failover protocol wasn't his first risky call. It was just the first one that had blown up spectacularly. I spent 2 hours compiling a folder of documentation. Emails where I'd warned about infrastructure vulnerabilities, budget proposals Derek had rejected, maintenance windows he'd shortened against recommendations, and incident reports from smaller outages that should have been warning signs. I wasn't planning to use it all, but I wanted it ready, just in case. At 3:45 p.m., I logged into the video conference for the infrastructure review. Andrew appeared first, looking tired but pleased. Then Derek joined, his expression completely neutral, which somehow felt more threatening than anger would have been. "Callista," Andrew started warmly. "Exceptional work last night. The CEO personally asked me to convey his appreciation. You prevented what could have been a catastrophic client loss." "Just doing my job," I said carefully. Derek cleared his throat. "Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. Callista, your contract situation represents an opportunity to restructure our infrastructure support model. We're moving toward a managed service provider arrangement that'll give us broader coverage at a reduced cost." Translation: they were replacing me with a cheaper outsourced team. "I see," I said. "What's the timeline?" "Your contract will conclude Friday. We've arranged for the MSB to shadow you this week to facilitate knowledge transfer." 3 days. They were giving me 3 days to transfer 4 years of specialized knowledge about their critically important, embarrassingly fragile infrastructure. Andrew looked uncomfortable. "Derek, given the complexity of our systems, might we consider extending?" "The decision is made," Derek interrupted smoothly. "Callista will compensate you fairly for your transition work. Your cooperation in making this smooth will be noted in your references." There it was, the implicit threat. Cooperate or we'll make your job search difficult. I took a breath, considering my options. I could fight, argue, leverage my position, or I could do something smarter. "Of course," I said pleasantly. "I'll prepare comprehensive documentation. When does the MSB team arrive?" Derek actually smiled. "Tomorrow morning. I appreciate your professionalism." The meeting ended. I sat staring at my screen, processing what had just happened. They were really doing this. Firing the engineer who just saved them millions because Derek wanted to prove he could cut costs. Julian appeared with coffee, reading my expression correctly. "How bad?" 3 days. He winced. "What are you going to do?" Exactly what they asked. "I'm going to document everything." Something in my tone made him pause. Why do I feel like there's more to that statement? "Because you know me." I smiled, and this time it was genuine. "They want documentation. They're going to get the most thorough, comprehensive, meticulously detailed documentation ever created. Every single fragile component, every workaround, every system that's 3 updates behind and technically unsupported. Everything." That sounds helpful, not vengeful. It's absolutely helpful. I'm being entirely professional. I'm just also being completely, brutally honest about the state of their infrastructure. Which, coincidentally, is going to terrify anyone who actually reads it. Understanding dawned in Julian's eyes. "You're creating a record." "I'm creating evidence. When this MSB realizes what they've actually signed up for and the whole house of cards collapses, there'll be no question about who warned them and who ignored those warnings." The MSB team arrived Wednesday morning. 2 guys named Flynn and Oscar, who seemed competent but completely overwhelmed when I started walking them through the Chicago data center architecture. I'd prepared a 300-page documentation package, organized by system, with detailed notes on every quirk, vulnerability, and makeshift solution. "This is extensive," Flynn said, scrolling through the PDF I'd sent over. "Brightwave's infrastructure is extensive," I replied. "You're supporting financial transaction processing for 17 banking clients. Downtime isn't an option, neither is error." Oscar looked pale. "How much of this is automated?" "About 60%. The other 40% requires human judgment and institutional knowledge. For example, the Baltimore cluster has a memory leak issue that hasn't been patched because the vendor discontinued support for that hardware generation. It needs manual restart every 72 hours, specifically between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Eastern, when transaction volume is lowest, following a specific sequence, or you'll corrupt the session databases. I watched them frantically taking notes. That's not in the documentation, Flynn asked. Page 147, section 8.3, subsection B, but yes, it's there. We continued like this for 6 hours. Every question they asked, I answered thoroughly and honestly, always referencing the specific page in my documentation where I detailed the issue. I was being the model of professional cooperation. I was also, systematically, revealing that Brightwave's infrastructure was far more complex and fragile than Derek had apparently led them to believe. By Thursday, Oscar had asked twice if they could extend my contract to provide ongoing consultation. I politely explained that would need to be arranged through Derek. Derek, meanwhile, was conspicuously absent. Andrew checked in daily, growing increasingly concerned as he sat in on knowledge transfer sessions and realized the magnitude of what they were losing. "Callista," he said Thursday afternoon, pulling me into a private call. "I didn't know Derek was planning this. I want you to know I pushed back hard, but he went over my head straight to the CFO with his cost savings projections. I appreciate that, Andrew, truly. Is there anything I can do? Give them honest feedback when this inevitably falls apart. That's all I ask." Friday morning, my last day, started with an emergency meeting. The MSB had formally requested a 3-month overlap period with me remaining available for consultation. Derek had apparently promised them a simple, well-documented infrastructure. Instead, they discovered what I'd been managing: a complex, partially antiquated business-critical system that required constant expert attention. Derek looked like he'd aged 5 years since Monday. "Callista, Flynn, and Oscar have expressed some concerns about the transition timeline. We'd like to discuss extending your availability on a consulting basis." "What kind of timeline are we discussing?" I asked neutrally. 60 days, part-time availability for questions and emergency support. I pretended to consider it. My consulting rate is $250 an hour, 4-hour minimum per incident, and I'll need a formal contract by end of business today. Derek's jaw tightened. $250 an hour was more than triple my contract rate. That seems excessive. That's the standard rate for emergency IT infrastructure consulting. If you'd like, I can provide references from 3 other companies I've done similar work for. I hadn't actually done consulting before, but I'd researched the market rates thoroughly. Alternatively, Flynn and Oscar seem capable. I'm sure they'll figure things out eventually. Andrew, who was also on the call, jumped in. "Derek, given the risk profile, Callista's rate is reasonable. I recommend we proceed." 2 hours later, I had a consulting contract guaranteeing me at least 20 hours a week for 8 weeks at consultant rates, with additional emergency call-out fees. I just turned my firing into a $40,000 raise. Julian laughed when I told him, "You're terrifying." I'm fair, they wanted to replace me with a cheaper option. Fine, but when reality meets budget fantasy, I'm not obligated to fix it for free. What happens when the 8 weeks are up? Either the MSB will have figured it out, or Brightwave will realize they need a full-time senior engineer and make me a real offer. Either way, I'm not the one who's desperate. The weekend passed quietly, which felt ominous. I spent Saturday at Mia's soccer game, Sunday doing absolutely nothing work-related, and Monday morning I woke up to my phone ringing at 6:15 a.m. Flynn, panicking. "The Baltimore cluster didn't restart properly. We followed your documentation exactly, but transactions are queuing and not processing. We're 30 minutes from major client impact." I sighed, opened my laptop, and logged in. "Did you clear the cache before initiating the restart sequence?" "What cache? That's not in the documentation." Section 8.3, subsection B, step 4, clear temporary cache files from the staging directory before initiating service restart. Did you skip reading the steps? Silence, then, we might have skimmed that section. 20 minutes later, I'd walked them through the fix. I logged 4 hours, sent an invoice, and went about my day. 3 similar calls came over the next week. Each time, the issue was something I'd thoroughly documented that they hadn't properly read or understood. Each time, I fixed it professionally and billed appropriately. After the 4th incident, Andrew called. They're not ready. No, I agreed. They're not, but they're learning. Derek's getting pressure from the CFO about the consulting fees. Apparently, my original budget proposal for keeping you full-time is now looking cost-effective. Interesting timing. Callista, if I could get approval for a full-time position, not a contract, with benefits and a 20% raise from your previous rate, would you be interested? I'd been expecting this, reporting structure. Directly to me, Derek would have no authority over your work or employment. I'll need it in writing, with a clause that any changes to reporting structure allow me to exit with 6-month severance. Done, I'll have HR draft something by tomorrow. That night, Julian and I celebrated with expensive wine and takeout Thai food. Mia, oblivious to the adult drama, chattered about her upcoming field trip to the Science Museum. You did it, Julian said, raising his glass. Not yet, Derek's still there, still in a position of power. This isn't over. I was right. The employment offer came through Tuesday, exactly as Andrew promised. Excellent salary, full benefits, reporting protection, the works. I signed it and sent it back within an hour. Thursday, I attended my first staff meeting as an official employee rather than a contractor. Derek was there, looking composed, but with an edge of something dangerous in his expression when his eyes landed on me. The meeting was routine until the end, when Derek said, "One more item. We're implementing a new change management protocol for all infrastructure updates. All changes, regardless of urgency, will require VP approval before implementation." I felt Andrew tense on the video call. Derek, that'll create bottlenecks for time-sensitive updates. Our current protocol has appropriate escalation paths. Our current protocol allowed an outage that cost us significant money and client confidence, Derek countered smoothly. This is about accountability and oversight. He was looking at me when he said it. This was retaliation, thinly disguised as policy. He was creating a mechanism to control and slow down my work, to manufacture failures he could attribute to me. I kept my expression neutral. What's the turnaround time for VP approval? 48 hours for standard changes, 4 hours for emergency changes. 4 hours during an emergency like the one that had started this whole mess would have been catastrophic. He was setting me up to fail. Andrew's voice was tight. I'll need to discuss this with the CTO. This represents a significant change to our operational model. It's already been approved, Derek said, effective immediately. The meeting ended. I sat back, mind racing. This was a problem, a serious one. Andrew called me 30 seconds later. I didn't know he was going to do that. I'm escalating to the CTO and CEO. He's trying to force me out by making my job impossible. I know, give me 24 hours, don't do anything rash. I spent the rest of the day documenting the new policy and projecting its impact on our incident response times. The numbers were damning. Our average time to resolution would triple. Our SLA guarantees to banking clients would be impossible to meet. I compiled it all into a brief, clear report and sent it to Andrew with Derek CC'd. Professional, factual, utterly devastating to Derek's new policy. Friday morning, I was invited to a meeting with the CTO, Stephanie Wu, whom I'd met exactly twice before. Andrew and Derek were also on the call. Stephanie didn't waste time. Callista, I read your impact analysis of the new change management protocol. Walk me through your math. I did, showing how the approval delays would affect each category of infrastructure work, with specific examples from recent incidents. By the time I finished, Derek was visibly frustrated. These projections assume worst-case scenarios, he argued. They assume scenarios we've actually experienced in the last 6 months, I countered. These aren't hypotheticals. This is our operational reality. Stephanie nodded slowly. Derek, I appreciate the intent behind increased oversight, but Callista's analysis is sound. This policy would put us in breach of our SLAs. We need a different approach. Derek's expression went carefully blank, the look of someone who just lost a battle but was already planning the next war. Perhaps a modified version then? VP approval for changes exceeding a certain risk threshold. Who defines the risk threshold? I asked quietly. He turned to me, and for just a second the mask slipped. Pure hostility flashed in his eyes before the professional veneer returned. A committee. Representatives from operations, engineering, and executive leadership. In other words, a structure where he'd still have control, just more diffused and harder to challenge. Stephanie considered this. Draft a proposal. I want engineering to have equal voice in the risk assessment framework. Callista, you'll represent infrastructure engineering on this committee. Derek's smile was thin. Of course. The meeting ended, and I realized what had just happened. Derek couldn't fire me anymore, couldn't control my work directly, so he was building a bureaucratic cage instead. And I'd just been volunteered to help construct it, while also being trapped inside it. Andrew caught me on a separate call immediately after. That could have gone worse. He's not going to stop, Andrew. This is personal now. I know, but you've got allies. Stephanie sees what's happening, even if she can't say it directly. Keep doing good work, keep documenting everything, and stay professional. He'll eventually make a mistake big enough that it can't be ignored. The problem was, I didn't know how long I could wait for Derek to self-destruct, and I wasn't sure the company would survive his mistakes in the meantime. The risk committee had its first meeting the following Wednesday. Besides Derek and me, there was Yolanda Park from operations and Thomas Brennan from the security team. Derek had clearly chosen people he thought he could control. He hadn't counted on Thomas. Thomas Brennan was a 20-year veteran of cybersecurity, the kind of professional who'd seen every trick and tolerated exactly zero nonsense. He listened to Derek's proposed risk framework for about 10 minutes before interrupting. This is overcomplicated. Risk assessment for infrastructure changes comes down to 4 factors: blast radius, rollback capability, business impact, and timing. You weight those factors, get a score. Anything above threshold needs additional approval. Simple. Derek tried to argue for his more complex system with multiple approval layers, but Thomas just stared at him until he trailed off. Unless there's a reason you need it complicated, Thomas asked, the question pointed. Of course not. Simplicity is fine, as long as we maintain proper oversight. We spent the next hour hammering out a framework that was actually reasonable. Derek tried several times to insert poison pills, little clauses that would give him unilateral authority, but Thomas caught every single one. By the end, we had a policy that was actually an improvement over our old system, clearer and more objective. I felt grudging hope that maybe this would work. That hope lasted 3 weeks. The Denver data center needed a critical security patch for a 0-day vulnerability that was being actively exploited in the wild. Time-sensitive, high risk if we didn't patch, but low implementation risk because the patch had been thoroughly tested. By our new framework, it didn't require VP approval. I scheduled it for the upcoming Saturday night maintenance window, sent out the standard notifications, and coordinated with the MSB team who'd be providing backup support. Friday afternoon, Derek sent out an email questioning my risk assessment and requesting the patch be delayed pending additional review. I responded with a detailed explanation, copying the entire risk committee, with links to the vendor security advisory and exploit reports. Thomas backed me up within 10 minutes, confirming this was exactly the kind of change our framework was designed to allow without delays. Derek replied to all, "Nevertheless, I'm uncomfortable proceeding without further discussion. Let's schedule a review meeting for Monday." The vulnerability was being exploited now. Waiting 3 more days was reckless. I called Stephanie directly. We have a 0-day vulnerability with active exploits in the wild, a tested patch ready to deploy, and Derek wants to wait 3 days to have a meeting about it. Our framework says this doesn't need his approval. He's overriding the process. Stephanie was quiet for a moment, Deploy the patch, I'll handle Derek. I need that in writing. You'll have it in 5 minutes. True to her word, an email arrived authorizing the patch deployment and reaffirming that the risk committee framework was decision-making authority, not advisory. Derek was CC'd. I deployed the patch Saturday night. It went flawlessly. No issues, no downtime, vulnerability closed. Monday morning, I was called into a meeting with Derek and HR. My stomach dropped. This was it. Whatever he was planning, this was his move. The HR representative was someone I didn't recognize. A woman named Lisa Hartwell, who had the careful, neutral expression of someone about to deliver bad news. Callista, there's been a complaint filed regarding your communication style and responsiveness to leadership feedback, Lisa began. I blinked. What specific incident is this regarding? Your deployment of the security patch, despite Director Miller's request to delay. I had CTO authorization. I followed the approved risk framework, and I closed a critical security vulnerability that was being actively exploited. I kept my voice level professional. Derek leaned forward. The issue isn't the technical decision. It's your pattern of disregarding input from operations leadership. This isn't the first time you've been difficult to work with. I'd like specifics, please. What other incidents are you referring to? Lisa consulted her notes. There are mentions of conflicts during the infrastructure transition with the MSB team, pushback on the change management policy, and the incident during the Chicago outage where you threatened to abandon critical work. I stared at Derek, understanding dawning. He'd been building a paper trail, reframing every interaction where I'd stood my ground as evidence of insubordination. The MSB transition involved me providing thorough documentation and training, which both Flynn and Oscar can confirm. The change management policy pushback was a technical impact analysis that the CTO requested and agreed with. And during the Chicago outage, I was responding to being informed my contract was ending in 4 hours while I was performing emergency work. I requested clarification of my employment status before continuing, which is entirely reasonable. Your tone in these interactions has been described as confrontational and unprofessional, Derek said smoothly. By whom? That's not relevant. It's absolutely relevant. I have the right to know who's making accusations about my professional conduct. Lisa shifted uncomfortably. The complaints came through Director Miller's office based on his observations and feedback from team members. So Derek is the complainant, witness, and judge. I looked directly at him. This is retaliation for my refusing to be pushed out quietly. That's a serious accusation, Lisa said. Yes, it is. And I can document every incident being misrepresented here, with emails, chat logs, and witnesses. Would you like me to provide that documentation? Derek's expression hardened. This meeting is about your conduct, not mine. Then let's talk about conduct. You disabled critical failover protocols to cut costs, causing a multi-million-dollar outage. You attempted to terminate my contract during that outage while I was fixing your mistake. You've repeatedly tried to override the risk committee framework that the CTO approved. And now you're filing false complaints to create grounds for my termination. That's not leadership, Derek. That's retaliation, and it's potentially illegal. The room went very quiet. Lisa cleared her throat. I think we need to pause this meeting. I'll need to review the documentation from all parties before we continue. I'll have everything compiled by end of day, I said, standing, and I'll be copying my personal attorney on the submission. I walked out before Derek could respond. My hands were shaking by the time I got back to my home office. Julian took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. He tried to build a case for firing me, I said into his shoulder, twisted everything to make me look insubordinate. What do you need? A labor attorney and about 6 hours to compile documentation. Julian already had his phone out. I'll call my college roommate. He's in employment law. By that evening, I had legal representation and a 20-page document chronicling every interaction with Derek, complete with emails, chat logs, witness names, and outcomes. My attorney, a sharp woman named Gabrielle Ross, reviewed it all and smiled. This is retaliation. Clear cut. The timeline alone proves it. You successfully challenged his authority multiple times, then suddenly you're getting performance complaints. Any mediocre lawyer could win this case. I don't want to sue. I want to keep my job and have him leave me alone. Then we make it clear that suing is an option you're prepared to take. That documentation goes to HR with a letter from me outlining the legal concerns. Most companies will back down fast when they realize the liability. The documentation and legal letter went to HR Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, I was invited to a meeting with Stephanie and the actual head of HR, not just Lisa. Stephanie didn't smile, but her tone was respectful. Callista, we've reviewed your documentation and Director Miller's complaints. We're treating this as a workplace conflict that needs mediation, not a performance issue. Your record is exemplary, and there's no basis for disciplinary action. Relief flooded through me, and Derek. Director Miller will be reminded of appropriate channels for operational disagreements. The Risk Committee framework stands as approved, and technical decisions within your authority are yours to make. It wasn't everything. Derek wasn't being fired or even formally reprimanded, as far as I could tell, but it was enough. He'd been warned off, and there was now a record of his retaliation attempt. I thought it was over. 3 weeks of peace followed. Derek stopped attending most of the Risk Committee meetings, sending representatives instead. My work proceeded normally. I even started to relax. Then the budget meeting happened. Annual planning, department budgets for the next fiscal year. Andrew presented his proposal for the infrastructure team, which included my position, 2 additional engineers to reduce our dependency on the MSB, and hardware refresh cycles we desperately needed. Derek presented an alternative proposal: eliminate my position, expand the MSB contract, and reallocate the salary savings to operations initiatives. We've successfully transitioned to the managed service model, Derek argued. Maintaining redundant internal expertise is an inefficient use of resources. The MSB can handle our needs at a lower total cost. Andrew countered immediately. The MSB needs Callista's oversight and escalation support. Our incident resolution metrics prove that. Eliminating her position will increase our risk and likely our costs when complex issues arise. The CFO, Russell Wade, looked interested in Derek's numbers. The cost differential is significant, $200,000 annually by these projections. Those projections assume the MSB can operate independently, which data from the past 3 months proves they can't, I said, speaking up. I've logged an average of 15 hours weekly providing guidance and escalation support. Without that, you're looking at longer incident resolution times and likely SLA breaches that'll cost more in client penalties than my salary. Derek smiled condescendingly. Perhaps if the knowledge transfer had been more thorough, that dependency wouldn't exist. The knowledge transfer was 300 pages of documentation plus 40 hours of direct training. The dependency exists because this infrastructure is complex and business critical. That's not a training problem, it's reality. The meeting ended without a decision, but I left feeling sick. Derek had found a new angle: frame me as an unnecessary expense during budget planning. Even if I was right about the MSB needing support, if the CFO wanted to cut costs, my position was vulnerable. Julian found me stress-eating ice cream at 10 p.m. They're really going to eliminate your job to save money. They're going to try, and if the CFO backs Derek's numbers, Andrew might not be able to stop it. What's your plan? I thought about it. Make myself undeniably necessary, and hope the MSB has a spectacular failure that proves my point before the budget gets finalized. I felt guilty even thinking it, hoping for a disaster, but Derek had backed me into a corner. The disaster came 2 weeks later, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Flynn called me at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, voice tight with panic. We've got a data corruption issue in the transaction database. It's spreading. We don't know how to stop it. I was logging in before he finished the sentence. What I found made my blood run cold. A database replication error had corrupted records, and the corruption was propagating through our backup systems. If we didn't stop it immediately, we'd lose transaction data integrity for thousands of banking customers. How long has this been happening? I demanded. We're not sure, we just noticed it an hour ago. An hour? The corruption could have spread through multiple backup cycles by now. I made a decision. I'm initiating emergency protocols. Stop all replication immediately, isolate the primary database, and start recovery procedures from the last clean backup. I need to verify that backup integrity first, though. Should we get Derek on the call? No time, this is happening now. I spent the next 4 hours in a focused fury of crisis management, walking Flynn and Oscar through procedures, making command decisions, and praying that the last clean backup was recent enough that we wouldn't lose too much data. By 3 a.m., we had it stabilized. Data loss was minimal, under 2 hours of transactions, and we had processes in place to manually reconcile those from redundant logs. It was fixable. At 3:17 a.m., Derek sent an email asking why he hadn't been notified of the emergency per protocol. I responded simply, emergency protocols prioritize resolution speed over notification chains. Issue is contained. Full incident report will be available by end of business today. The incident report was a masterpiece. I detailed exactly what had happened, how it was resolved, the potential cost if resolution had been delayed, and the technical complexity that required senior infrastructure expertise. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. The facts spoke clearly. Without someone of my skill level available for immediate escalation, this could have been catastrophic. Andrew forwarded it to the budget committee without comment. The next budget meeting, Russell, the CFO, opened with a question directed at Derek. This incident report suggests the MSB still requires significant expert oversight. What's changed since your proposal to eliminate internal infrastructure expertise? Derek tried to spin it, suggesting additional MSB training, better procedures, enhanced monitoring. But Thomas from security cut through it. Training doesn't replace experience. Procedures don't replace judgment. This incident needed someone who understood our specific systems deeply enough to make fast decisions. That's Callista. Losing that capability to save money is pound foolish when one major incident could cost us millions and client trust. Stephanie added her support. The budget proposal was revised. My position stayed. I should have felt relieved, victorious even. Instead, I just felt tired. That night, I told Julian, I can't keep doing this. Fighting for my job every few months, waiting for Derek's next move. It's exhausting. So what do you want to do? I don't know. I love the work. I like Andrew and the team. But Derek's always going to be there, always looking for an angle to push me out. Maybe he won't be. I looked at him. What do you mean? People like Derek eventually overreach. He's already got a record of bad judgment. The outage he caused, the retaliation attempt, this budget thing. How many more mistakes before the company decides he's the problem, not you? It was a nice thought. But I'd seen too many Dereks in corporate America, failing upward, outlasting the people they targeted through sheer persistence and political maneuvering. Still, I didn't have to wait long to see if Julian was right. 6 weeks later, Derek announced a major initiative. Consolidating our data centers from 4 locations to 2, outsourcing the physical infrastructure management to save operational costs. It was presented as innovative modernization. Andrew, Thomas, and I all raised concerns. Consolidation increased risk by reducing geographic redundancy. The cost savings looked good on paper, but didn't account for the complexity and risk of migration. The proposed outsourcing partner had no experience with financial transaction systems. Derek dismissed every concern. The CFO, impressed by the projected savings, approved the initiative. Derek was tasked with leading it. This is going to be a disaster, I told Andrew privately. I know, but it's his disaster now. Document your concerns, make them available if asked, and focus on your own work. When this falls apart, make sure there's no question that you warned them. So that's what I did. I submitted a formal risk assessment, detailed, and professional, outlining every concern and recommending mitigation strategies. I sent it through proper channels, got it on record, and then stepped back. The consolidation project launched in September. By October, it was behind schedule and over budget. By November, the outsourcing partner had missed 3 major milestones. By December, it was clear the whole thing was collapsing. In January, during a transaction processing incident that the understaffed, partially migrated infrastructure couldn't handle efficiently, we had our first SLA breach with a major banking client. Then a second. Then a third. The board got involved. Derek was removed from the consolidation project and replaced with a special task force led by Stephanie. Andrew was asked to develop a recovery plan, and I was offered a promotion, principal infrastructure architect, with expanded authority and a team of 3 engineers reporting to me. Derek remained VP of operations, but his authority was quietly curtailed. He stopped coming to technical meetings, stopped challenging engineering decisions. He'd been defanged. At my promotion celebration dinner, Julian raised his glass. To Callista, who won by simply being good at her job and letting her enemies destroy themselves. "I'll drink to that," I said, but privately I knew it wasn't quite that simple. I'd won because I'd documented everything, built alliances, stayed professional even when I wanted to scream, and been willing to stand my ground when it mattered. I'd won because I'd understood that in corporate warfare, the best weapon is often just being undeniably good at what you do and making sure the right people know it. And I'd won because sometimes, if you're patient enough, people like Derek really do overreach and face consequences. 3 months later, Derek accepted a position at another company. His farewell email was brief and professional. I didn't attend his goodbye party. I did, however, send one final email to the risk committee, suggesting we document lessons learned from the consolidation project to inform future infrastructure decisions. It was approved unanimously. That document became part of company policy. It included every warning I'd raised, every concern that had been dismissed, and every consequence that had resulted. It didn't mention Derek by name. It didn't need to. His legacy was a cautionary tale about what happens when you prioritize politics over competence and ego over expertise. Mine, I hoped, would be different. If you've stuck with this story about fighting workplace politics with documentation and professionalism, thank you. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. There are more stories like this one, and your support helps us keep sharing them. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job well and making sure everyone knows it. Now, when people ask me for career advice, especially women in technical fields dealing with executives who underestimate them, I tell them what I learned. Document everything, build alliances with competent people, stay professional even when others aren't, and never underestimate the power of simply being undeniably good at what you do. The system isn't fair, but sometimes, if you're strategic and patient, you can make it work anyway. And there's something deeply satisfying about that.